In the heart of northern Arizona, where the pines whisper secrets and the nights are cruel, a tiny, frost-bitten bobcat cub lay motionless by the roadside, barely breathing, discarded like trash. Locals shook their heads. It's too far gone. Let it die. But one woman refused. A woman with a quiet heart and fire in her soul. What happened next was something no one could have imagined, a story of survival, connection, and a wild bond that defied every odd. Stay with us. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a rescue. It's a rebirth. A silent roadside cry. Some lives are saved not by force, but by the quiet defiance of a heart that refuses to walk away. The snow had fallen earlier than expected in Flagstaff, Arizona, draping the ponderosa pines in a ghostly white silence. It was barely 6 a.m. The morning light hadn't yet pierced the heavy clouds, and the air hung cold and damp over the deserted highway. Rachel Lindstrom gripped her thermos tighter as she drove along County Route 66, the tires of her aging Subaru humming steadily over the frostbitten asphalt. A layer of fog hovered low over the ground, curling like smoke across the shoulders of the road. She was running a little early to the Northern Pines Veterinary Clinic. A rare thing. The sky was still a muted gray when her headlights caught something at the edge of the ditch. At first, it looked like just another mound of snow or maybe road debris. But instinct, the kind that couldn't be trained, made her slow down. She eased the car onto the gravel shoulder, crunching to a stop. Her breath misted as she stepped out, boots crunching in the snowpack. The cold bit through her insulated jacket immediately. There, curled almost motionless under a dead bush dusted with snow, was a tiny creature, no bigger than a house cat. Rachel crouched slowly, careful not to startle it. As she drew closer, she realized it wasn't a domestic cat at all. It was a bobcat cub, maybe 6 or 7 weeks old, its limbs stiff, its fur clumped with ice. One paw was bent at a sickening angle, the fur along its back patchy and dull. A bloodied scrape ran along its ribs. Its breathing was shallow, more like soft twitches than full breaths. She glanced at the road. No cars. No sounds but wind and distant crows. Somewhere nearby, a pair of vultures circled lazily above the treetops. Rachel's heart thudded. Oh no, little guy, what happened to you? A part of her, the trained, rational part, told her to step back. This was a wild animal. Injured. Likely dying. It would be more natural to let it go. But another voice inside her pushed forward. The cub stirred faintly, its ears twitching once at her voice. That was all it took. Rachel pulled off her fleece jacket and gently wrapped it around the fragile body, careful of the twisted paw. The heat from her own body transferred through the layers of fabric. She felt the faint tremor of life. Hang on, she whispered. You're not dying out here. With surprising swiftness, she was back in her car, seat heater on high, jacket bundle on her lap. She cradled the bobcat with one hand while steering with the other, driving faster than she usually dared through icy curves. The clinic was only 12 miles away. But every second felt like a mile. The sun began to rise, casting pale beams through the thinning fog. A new day. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Inside the warmth of the clinic, beneath sterile lights and uncertain glances, Rachel would have to make the first of many impossible decisions. But that morning on the road, one thing was already clear: this cub wasn't just a rescue. It was a challenge to everything she thought she knew about wildness, mercy, and hope. One chance at life. Mercy doesn't ask if it's possible, it just acts. The bell over the door at Northern Pines Veterinary Clinic gave a sharp jingle as Rachel rushed inside, snowflakes still clinging to her hair. Dr. Sam Hayden looked up from the examination table where he was stitching a terrier's leg. He was in his mid-40s, barrel-chested with salt and pepper stubble and eyes that had seen too many cases with endings he couldn't fix. "What is that?" he asked, already frowning. Rachel didn't speak. She laid the fleece bundle gently on the clean metal table beside him. When she pulled back the jacket, Sam's frown deepened. Bobcat? 6 weeks, maybe 7. Found him just off County 66. He's hypothermic, malnourished, and his front left paw looks broken, maybe worse. Her voice was low, controlled, but her hands trembled slightly. Sam sighed. You should have called animal control. I didn't have time. He was barely breathing. Sam poked gently at the cub's side with gloved fingers. The creature flinched. A good sign. Rachel, he said slowly, this cub has less than a 5% chance. Internal injuries we can't see. Exposure. Infection. Even if he pulls through, there's no guarantee he'll ever survive in the wild. I know, she whispered. Sam paused. He knew Rachel well. She was capable, precise, and didn't usually get emotional over cases. But the way she stood now, protective, defiant, reminded him of the first year she started. The girl who once cried after losing a fox kit with distemper. You're asking for a miracle, he said. Rachel looked down at the tiny bobcat, now connected to a heating pad, its sides rising shallowly. I don't care if it's a long shot, she said. I want to try. Sam hesitated, then gave a tight nod. All right. But you take full responsibility. After hours. Off the books. He can't stay in the kennel with the others, he's wild. Dangerous. I'll keep him in isolation. I'll handle everything. Rachel moved fast. She cleared the corner exam room and turned it into a makeshift ICU. She placed a soft blanket in a crate, prepped the 4-line with warmed fluids, and readied the syringe for antibiotics. Sam returned briefly with an X-ray kit. Compound fracture, he confirmed after a few minutes. We can splint it for now, but it's going to be tricky. He'll need rest, real nutrition, and pain management. I'll give him all of it, Rachel said. As the hours passed, the cub, now referred to quietly as the little guy, stabilized slightly. His body temperature rose to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. He took in a few milliliters of formula by syringe. Later that night, as the clinic lights dimmed and the snowfall turned heavier outside, Rachel curled up on a cot nearby, bundled in scrubs, her eyes never leaving the crate. Against all logic, she felt it deep in her chest. He wanted to live. The coming weeks would test Rachel more than she expected, not just her skills as a vet tech, but the depth of her compassion, patience, and belief in second chances. Because Ash, the name she would soon give him, was about to become more than just a wild animal in need. He was about to become her purpose. Ash takes his first breath of hope. Healing begins in the quiet moments, when no one's watching, and someone still chooses to care. By the second day, the little bobcat had a name. Rachel called him Ash, for the pale gray of his coat and the soft, smoky markings that curled over his shoulders like soot. It felt right. Wild, but vulnerable. Ash's condition was still critical. His fractured paw was now supported by a custom splint made from medical foam and a modified tongue depressor. Rachel checked the wrap every few hours, applying cold compresses to reduce swelling. She barely slept, taking catnaps between feedings and temperature checks. She documented everything in a leather notebook: time, dosage, reactions. But there were no guarantees. Each hour was borrowed time. Dr. Hayden watched with quiet skepticism. He's hanging in, he admitted by the third morning, but Rachel, don't get attached. She didn't respond. She was already attached. At first, Ash wouldn't open his eyes. His world was still silent and cold. But by day 4, during a late-night feeding, Rachel saw the flicker, 2 slits parting, revealing cloudy blue. You're awake, she whispered. The cub's gaze met hers briefly before his eyes slid closed again, too exhausted to hold the connection. But that one glance gripped something deep in her, a promise unspoken. Rachel's home became an extension of the clinic as she moved Ash into a converted utility room with low light, warmth, and strict noise control. She stayed close. Every syringe feeding, every slow movement, every whispered encouragement, she was there. Sometimes, Ash would let out the faintest growl, a dry, kittenish rasp that held more fear than fight. But he was alive. And every breath brought him more strength. Rachel knew the rules: wild animals must stay wild. No names. No bonding. No affection. But she broke those rules the moment she wrapped him in her jacket. Still, she walked the line carefully. No petting beyond what was necessary. No cooing or cuddling. But she did talk to him, quietly, consistently. "You're tough," she'd murmur while adjusting the four. "You've got this, Ash. You've got to pull through." On the sixth night, as a snowstorm howled against the window panes, Ash stirred from his blanket. Rachel had just stepped out for a fresh hot pack when she heard a soft thump. She raced back in to find him halfway out of the crate, shaky on three legs, splinted paw lifted, eyes glassy but alert. Rachel dropped to her knees. "No, you're not ready." But Ash didn't collapse. He looked at her, really looked, and then gave a low, hoarse hiss. It wasn't much, but it was the most bobcat-like thing he'd done since she found him. She smiled through tears. "That's more like it." By the end of the first week, Ash was eating on his own. Small bits of warmed chicken, blended formula, and, eventually, soft strips of rabbit meat. Rachel monitored his weight, vitals, and gait. Every day brought a new milestone. Word of the rescue spread fast. Rachel's quiet social media post, a single photo of Ash's tiny paw curled around her finger, had gone viral. Thousands of shares. Comments from strangers all over the country. Some praised her compassion. Others criticized her for interfering with nature. One comment stuck with her. "Why save a predator that might turn on you later?" Rachel didn't answer online. But she whispered a reply to Ash that night. Because no one else would. Outside, the snow began to melt. Inside, Ash's world, and Rachel's, was just beginning to thaw. The language between them. Sometimes, the strongest bonds are built in silence, not through words, but through survival. 2 weeks after Rachel found him on the side of the road, Ash had transformed from a trembling pile of fur into something closer to what he was born to be: alert, cautious, and surprisingly fierce. His body was still small, his weight only a little over 5 pounds, but the fire in his golden eyes told a different story. He moved more now, pacing the edges of his enclosure at Rachel's home, sniffing, testing, watching. That splinted paw remained stiff, but he was adapting, putting weight on the good legs, learning balance again. Rachel had converted her old mudroom into Ash's recovery den. The floor was covered in thick fleece blankets, and she had set up low ramps, tree branches, and scent-stimulating toys made of bundled herbs and leather strips. The space was safe, warm, but just wild enough. She never reached in without announcing herself. "Hey, Ash," she'd call softly before stepping in, hands visible, movements slow. He still startled easily, and sometimes he'd hiss or crouch low when she got too close. But he never struck. Not once. There was a trust building there, not the kind you see in a pet, not obedience, but a mutual understanding. Rachel respected his space, and in return, Ash began to allow her presence. Sometimes he'd even press his side gently against the mesh wall while she sat nearby with her clipboard, as if to say, "I know you." Late one night, while reviewing his treatment log, Rachel paused to listen. From behind the door, she heard a soft, rhythmic rasp, not a growl, not a hiss. Curious, she cracked the door open. Ash was grooming his injured paw. The moment was quiet, instinctive, and powerful. It meant he no longer viewed the paw as useless. It meant he was healing, not just physically, but emotionally. He had accepted that part of himself. She stood in silence, hand over her heart, letting the pride wash through her. Each morning, Rachel would sit with Ash as she prepared his food. She didn't try to make him love her. That wasn't the goal. What she wanted, what she hoped for, was for him to become strong enough to leave her someday. To reclaim what had nearly been stolen by Frost and Fear. One afternoon, while cleaning his enclosure, she spoke aloud without meaning to. "You don't need me forever, Ash. Just long enough to remember who you are." Ash didn't respond, of course, but from the corner of the enclosure, his head tilted slightly. He blinked once, slow and deliberate, a gesture Rachel had seen in her house cats, but it felt different coming from him. Like acknowledgement. As the days passed, Rachel became more disciplined. Less eye contact. Fewer spoken words. More distance. It tore at her heart, but she knew the truth: overbonding could ruin his chances at ever being wild again. Still, it wasn't easy. One evening, a local news station called, asking to do a feature on The Girl and the Bobcat. They wanted footage. Interviews. A camera crew. Rachel turned them down. "This isn't a story," she said. "It's his life. Not mine." But the story told itself anyway. Wildlife groups began to send support, medical supplies, supplements, even a small grant to build a pre-release training pen. Her inbox overflowed. Strangers from across the country wrote letters, thanking her for not giving up on the little cub. Yet not everyone was supportive. An anonymous email arrived one night. Cold. Bitter. "That animal will never survive in the wild. You're playing God. Letting it die would have been more humane." Rachel read it once, then deleted it. She looked over at Ash, who was curled beneath a branch, ears twitching as he dreamed. Letting him die? She shook her head. Letting him live, that was the hard part. One morning, as she entered to clean his water bowl, she heard a low growl. Not threatening. Almost protective. Ash stood on the far side of the enclosure, tail swishing low, shoulders taut. He wasn't looking at her, he was staring at the window. A raccoon had wandered into view. Rachel watched as Ash crouched low, eyes locked, calculating. His body language had changed, no longer defensive, but predatory. It was his first true hunting posture. And it was beautiful. "Attaboy," she whispered under her breath. Ash didn't look back at her this time. His attention was fully on the outside world. He was remembering who he was. And soon, it would be time to test if he could go back to it. A wild heart rekindled. Some creatures are born to run free, and even love must learn to let them go. By the start of the 5th week, Ash no longer moved like a victim. He stalked. He leaped. He owned his space, even with that once broken paw, now fully healed and no longer splinted. The limp was slight, almost imperceptible, a small scar tracing the fur where the fracture had fused. But to Rachel, it was a badge. A mark that said, "I survived." His weight had tripled. Nearly 15 pounds now. His coat had filled in thick and dappled, silver gray laced with cinnamon and black rosettes, sleek and glistening with health. His tufted ears flicked toward every sound. His eyes burned bright amber beneath his arched brows, sharp and unreadable, the eyes of a wild thing. And that, at last, was the problem. Ash was outgrowing Rachel's care. She watched him prowl his enclosure with increasing restlessness, pausing only to peer out through the mesh fencing toward the trees. The scent of pine and juniper rode the early spring breeze. It stirred something primal in him. His muscles twitched with desire. Rachel could see it in the way he lowered his body and stared long at the woods, not in fear, but longing. The time was coming. She had fought to keep him alive, now she had to fight for the opposite, to let him go. But there were procedures, evaluations, state laws. That's when Officer Mark Reyes stepped in, a seasoned wildlife rehabilitation specialist with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Mid-50s, flannel shirt and sun-wrinkled, with steady eyes and no time for sentiment. He arrived with a clipboard and an agenda. "We'll see if he qualifies for rewilding," he said after observing Ash for less than 2 minutes. "But from what I've heard, this one's probably imprinted. Animals that associate humans with food or comfort don't usually last long out there." Rachel bristled. "I never treated him like a pet." Reyes didn't argue, but his expression didn't soften either. "We'll let him decide. Nature doesn't lie." That weekend, Rachel loaded Ash gently into a transport crate. No sedative. Just quiet patience and soft lighting. He didn't resist. But he didn't look at her either. The rewilding pen was located on the outskirts of Coconino National Forest, 2 acres of fenced, dense terrain. Pines, logs, prey scent trails. No people. No distractions. Ash was released into the center. For a moment, he crouched low, frozen, ears twitching. Then, without hesitation, he vanished into the underbrush. Rachel's chest tightened. Over the next 3 days, hidden cameras monitored Ash's movements. He showed promising signs, marking territory, climbing, stalking shadows, reacting fearfully to human scent, and vocalizing at coyotes nearby. A mouse was released on day 2. Ash caught it within minutes. No hesitation. Reyes reviewed the footage with Rachel. "He's got instincts," he admitted. "More than I expected. He might just make it." Rachel nodded but didn't speak. Watching Ash navigate the terrain stirred something fierce and bittersweet inside her. But the final test was the most important. It was called the vanishing window, a staged observation where the animal's human caretaker enters the outer enclosure to refill a water station and then leaves, all while the animal watches from hiding. If the animal remains out of sight, shows no approach behavior, and avoids human contact entirely, it's a green light for release. Rachel entered the pen with a full jug, heart pounding. She knew he was watching. Somewhere behind the scrub oak, under the fallen logs. She didn't speak. Didn't call his name. She simply walked, poured the water, and left. Outside the fence, she waited beside Reyes, hands clenched tight. A minute passed. Then another. A flicker of movement in the camera feed, Ash stepped from the shadows. Silent, controlled. He sniffed the air where Rachel had stood, then turned away. He didn't follow. He didn't even pause. Reyes turned to her. "That's your answer." Rachel tried to smile. But tears gathered in her eyes. That night, alone in her car, parked at the edge of the forest, Rachel wrote in her notebook. "He doesn't need me anymore. Which means I did everything right." And yet, the silence felt heavier than it ever had. She had saved a wild creature's life. Now she had to trust the wild to keep it. Tested by the wild. The wild doesn't give second chances, but it remembers those who earn them. The reintroduction site in Coconino National Forest stretched like a living labyrinth, thick underbrush, towering pines, rocky ledges, and winding trails carved by deer, foxes, and the occasional mountain lion. Ash had been released at dawn. There was no ceremony, no final moment of farewell. Just a quiet unbolting of the crate and the soft shuffle of paws disappearing into the undergrowth. Rachel stood beside Officer Mark Reyes as the bobcat slipped from her life. The morning air was brisk, filled with the scent of wet earth and juniper, but Rachel barely felt the cold. Her arms were crossed tightly, jaw clenched. She wanted to run after him. to scoop him up and bring him home. But that instinct wasn't love. It was fear. Reyes said nothing at first. Just watched the trees where Ash had gone. Then he spoke, voice low. This is the part people don't like. The not knowing. Rachel exhaled slowly. How long do you track them? We tag with a soft GPS, lasts about 2 weeks. After that, it's up to the wild to decide. Ash's collar was a temporary device, programmed to fall off automatically. Until then, it would send daily pings to a secure tracker, letting them monitor his position. They wouldn't intervene unless his movements suggested distress, injury, or death. For the next few days, Rachel checked the data religiously. Day 1, Ash stayed within a half-mile of the release site. Movement was slow, cautious. Normal. Day 2, he wandered further. Traveled 2.3 miles east. Paused at a rock formation for hours, possibly finding shelter. Day 3, he doubled back, circled a shallow creek. The tracker showed a sudden burst of activity. Possibly a chase. Rachel dared to hope, was he hunting? Day 4, no movement for 12 hours. Her stomach twisted. She didn't sleep. But then, a new ping. He had moved again. North. Higher elevation. Reyes reassured her, but he was honest too. Every bobcat reintroduction is a gamble. Cars. Coyotes. Disease. Or just the shock of being alone again. Some don't make it. Rachel nodded. But she already knew. Ash was no ordinary bobcat. On the 7th day, Rachel hiked into the forest with Reyes to retrieve the GPS collar. The signal had stopped transmitting, indicating that it had dropped off as programmed. They found it beneath a thicket near a cluster of paw prints, large, clean, and unmistakable. Fresh scat nearby. Bones of a small rabbit. Ash had been hunting. Feeding. Surviving. Rachel crouched and touched the damp earth where he had stood just hours before. She imagined him now, padding silently through the forest, his muscles fluid, his instincts sharpened, his golden eyes cutting through the morning fog like blades. He was out there. And he was free. One last look. Freedom means letting go, even when your heart begs to hold on. Spring came early to the high desert that year. The last snow melted into the soil, giving way to wildflowers that pushed up through the rocky forest floor like tiny bursts of hope. It had been 3 weeks since Ash's release. Rachel tried to return to her routine, morning shifts at the clinic, checkups, cleaning stalls, treating rescue animals. But something felt incomplete. She found herself glancing toward the forest more often, as if expecting to see a gray shadow move between the trees. The GPS collar had fallen off on schedule. After that, there had been no pings, no updates. Just silence. And in that silence, she heard her own heartbeat, sometimes heavy, sometimes hollow. One morning, unable to shake the ache building in her chest, Rachel took a day off. She packed a small bag, grabbed her boots and camera, and drove back toward the place where she'd first found him, the long stretch of County 66 where it had all begun. The roadside ditch still looked the same. Lonely. Unnoticed. She pulled over and sat for a while in the silence, listening to the wind pass through the pines. A hawk screeched high above, and in the distance, a rabbit darted across the road. And then, she drove north. Deeper into the Coconino. She hiked slowly, letting her boots press gently into the soil, every step deliberate. She wasn't looking for Ash. Not really. She was just hoping. 3 miles in, she reached a clearing near the edge of a granite bluff. The light spilled through the canopy in fractured beams, dappling the forest floor. That's when she heard it, the soft, low rasp of something moving just ahead. She froze. A figure emerged from the brush. He was larger now. Lean and taut with strength, muscles rippling beneath his pelt. His coat was brilliant in the sun, silver-streaked with cinnamon, his ears upright, the faint scar on his front leg barely visible beneath thick fur. Ash. Rachel didn't move. Didn't speak. She knew better. He stood there, 20 feet away, his golden eyes meeting hers. Not with fear. Not even with affection. But with recognition. A moment passed. 1 breath. 2. Then, as quietly as he had come, Ash turned away and disappeared into the trees. Rachel stood for a long time, the air still around her. She didn't cry. She smiled. Because in that fleeting moment, she saw everything she needed. Ash was alive. Ash remembered. And Ash had chosen the wild, not because he had to, but because he could. She turned and began the hike back down the ridge, the sun warm on her back and a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in months. The goodbye she never got had just become the most beautiful one she could have asked for. After the wild. Some rescues aren't about keeping, they're about releasing something precious into the world, and trusting it will find its way. Back home in Flagstaff, life moved on. Rachel returned to her usual rhythm, working long hours at Northern Pines Veterinary Clinic, tending to everything from injured squirrels to aging Labradors. The waiting room filled with chatter, phone calls, and the steady hum of everyday animal emergencies. But behind the noise, something inside her had shifted. Ash had left a silence that echoed louder than chaos. In her kitchen, on the middle shelf near the window, sat a small glass jar. Inside it, the splint she'd crafted for Ash's paw, now wrapped in a piece of blue gauze and sealed with a handwritten label, Ash, Week 1. She didn't keep it as a trophy. It wasn't a reminder of success. It was a reminder of choice, the moment she decided not to walk away. The viral post she'd shared weeks ago had spiraled far beyond her control. Wildlife pages reposted it. Animal rehab centers reached out. Letters poured in from across the country, from schoolchildren in Missouri to an elderly man in Maine who wrote, "I never cared much about animals, until I read your story." One letter arrived from a young woman in Tennessee. It was only 2 sentences. "I lost my fight with depression last year. But your story about Ash made me want to try again. If he can survive, maybe I can too." Rachel read it twice. Then a third time. Her throat tightened. She pinned it to her fridge. Ash's journey wasn't just about the wilderness anymore. Somehow, a half-frozen bobcat had given something to people, something they hadn't known they needed. She began receiving invitations to speak at rescue centers and wildlife conferences. A sanctuary in Colorado offered her a full-time position. She considered it briefly, but her answer was clear. "I belong here," she told Dr. Hayden. Flagstaff was home. It was where she found Ash. Where Ash had found her. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out a storage closet at the clinic, Rachel came across an old cardboard box marked, "Clinic Miscellaneous." Inside, tucked beneath folded towels and spare 4 lines, was a stuffed toy, a small, plush bobcat with threadbare ears and one sewn-on paw askew. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to a lynx cub rescued 3 years ago, the one she couldn't save. Rachel held the toy for a long moment. She didn't cry. She smiled. For the first time in a long time, that memory no longer hurt. It had led her to Ash. And Ash had led her to something greater. A deeper understanding. A new strength. She tucked the toy gently back in the box and stood. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. And somewhere beyond the ridges and canyons, she imagined him, wild, watchful, free. Still choosing life. The echo of Ash. We never truly lose those we let go, not when they leave something behind in us. A month passed. Then another. Spring deepened, bringing bursts of wildflowers across the desert floor and soft breezes down from the San Francisco peaks. The days grew longer, but Rachel no longer marked time by sunrise and sunset, she measured it by the quiet growth inside her. Ash was gone. Truly gone. Somewhere deep in the heart of the forest. But not from her. She still dreamed of him sometimes, not as the fragile creature in a fleece jacket, but as he had stood on that ridge, tall, strong, burning with life. Those dreams didn't haunt her. They comforted her. They reminded her she'd made the right choice, even if it had cost her a piece of her heart. One cool April morning, Rachel took a walk before work. No destination, just wandering through the scrub and ponderosa trails that bordered the town's edge. She paused at a clearing she hadn't visited in years, a small knoll that overlooked a narrow creek, tucked behind a veil of manzanita. Birds chirped softly in the branches above, and the sunlight filtered through in golden streaks. Rachel sat on a rock and let the peace settle over her. And then, she noticed it. A print. In the soft soil near the edge of the stream. Not a dog. Not a coyote. A feline pad, large, sharp, clean. The back claw marks faint but present. A bobcat. She crouched low, brushing the outline gently with her fingers. Still fresh. Maybe a few hours old. Her heart thumped once. She looked up. All was still. Nothing moved. But she didn't need to see him. She didn't need confirmation. Somewhere nearby, Ash had passed through. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. Maybe it was chance. Maybe it was goodbye. Or maybe it was something else, something quieter, more sacred. A thank you. Rachel exhaled a soft breath and stood. She left the print untouched and walked back the way she came, her steps light, her chest open. Later that week, she added a final entry to the leather notebook that had chronicled every detail of Ash's recovery. She wrote just 4 lines. He lives among the trees now. Untethered. Unafraid. He carries no name, no past. Only the strength to keep going. She closed the book and placed it on her shelf. Next to it stood a small framed photo, not of Ash, but of the ditch where she'd first found him, the empty roadside where one life met another. A reminder that miracles don't always begin with thunder. Sometimes, they begin with silence. And someone who decides, not this one. Not today. Rachel turned off the light and left for the clinic, the morning sun rising behind her, casting long shadows toward the forest, where the wild ran free. And somewhere in those trees, Ash ran, too. The story of Ash isn't just about a rescued bobcat, it's a mirror held up to all of us. When the world says, let it die, when the odds are low and the effort feels thankless, we're faced with a choice, walk away, or lean in. Rachel chose to lean in. She gave time, trust, and tenderness to something others deemed hopeless, and in doing so, gave a wild heart its second chance. In life, you may find yourself standing at the edge of someone else's struggle. You might feel powerless, too small to make a difference. But remember this, even the smallest act of mercy can rewrite a story. At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe these moments matter. Moments of quiet defiance, of choosing love when no one else does. So here's your challenge. The next time you're told, it's not worth it, ask yourself, what if it is? And if this story stirred something in you, stay close. There are more wild hearts waiting to be found. More stories worth telling. And maybe, just maybe, you're the one meant to tell them. Join us at Paw Prints and Stories, where every paw print has a purpose.